civil war, the bullets are still flying. This is only training, but the ammunition is live. Angola's nationalists have always been divided, but since the ending of Portuguese colonial rule 3 months ago, they've been fighting each other with ever-increasing ferocity. The big powers are now being drawn in, and the conflict is a growing threat to international stability. These are troops of Unita, the generally pro-Western group led by Dr. Jonas Savimbi. And though their training's impressively tough, it's so far not been good enough to give them the upper hand. Towards the end of last year, Unita looked set for victory. But over the last few weeks, the tide has turned against them, and they're now under heavy pressure from their rivals, the Russian-backed MPLA. The military situation changes day by day, but the overall pattern is this. Unita holds the south, while the MPLA controls an ever-increasing area in the center. Unita's ally, the FNLA, which has been supported by Zaire and the United States, is now almost squeezed out of its territory in the north and has ceased to be a major factor in the conflict. More live ammunition, only this time it's MPLA troops. This is a passing out parade for 800 MPLA recruits, held in what was once the Portuguese Army's main barracks in Luanda. The MPLA's Minister of Defence, Iko Carrera, hands out berries which confirm them as combat troops. Only 8 weeks before, many were simply living in the Angolan bush or shanty towns. Now, after intensive training from Russian and Cuban instructors, they're passing out as the elite of the MPLA army, as proud relatives watch. There are few firm statistics about the war, but it's thought that each side has roughly 15,000 to 20,000 regular troops. Total war casualties, including civilians, are estimated at around 100,000 dead or wounded. Here, MPLA troops honor 4 fallen comrades. The deciding factor in the MPLA's success, Soviet arms. For a long time, the extent of Soviet involvement was unclear and denied even on the battlefront. But as a Marxist-oriented organization, the MPLA was a natural choice for Soviet support. The Americans now estimate Soviet spending in Angola at around $200 million. This anti-aircraft gun has had little use yet, as the war's been mostly on the ground, but Soviet rocket launchers have proved a devastating addition to the MPLA's firepower. Tanks, too, have been provided. MPLA territory is governed from Luanda, the coastal city which served the Portuguese, too, as a capital. Most of the settlers have now gone back to Portugal, and the beaches on which they once relaxed are now the playground of those Angolans who are too young to be recruited into the MPLA army. Few adults have the leisure to enjoy the beaches, but among the handful of Portuguese who remain, old habits die hard. Among the sunbathers a party of Russian advisors who didn't want to be filmed. In the harbour, protected by camouflaged anti-aircraft and field guns, is a Soviet ship with a deck cargo of tracked amphibious vehicles. Useful equipment now that many bridges have been blown up by retreating forces. MPLA officers prevented us from filming them in detail. In the centre of Luanda, the symbols of 500 years of colonial rule have been removed or suitably disguised. Every street has its quota of revolutionary posters and slogans, though in some cases, history has moved too fast for all conflicting claims to be erased. The troops themselves are very much in evidence, sometimes armed, sometimes not. Although there are plenty of soldiers and weapons, Luanda does have some shortages, the most important being food. A recent dock strike for higher wages left cargo ships stranded outside the harbour. Meat and butter are both scarce, and bottled beer or water are now practically unobtainable. Even local fruit is a rarity. Occasionally, as on this day, a lorry load of bananas or pineapples arrives, but army roadblocks and blown-up bridges put off all but the most determined traders. Only fish is available regularly, but it's not as plentiful as it once was. Overlooking the harbour, the MPLA have made their headquarters in the medieval fort which was once the house of the Portuguese High Command in Angola. Inside, the fort has become a graveyard of Portuguese heroes, symbols of a rule that's now ended. These shattered bits of history go unnoticed by the fort's new occupants. Luanda has not suffered any war damage, but for the moment at least, the construction of new buildings is at a stop. Most of the money and the skills have gone, with the Portuguese, back to Lisbon, and Luanda remains a city of half-completed hotels and flats. The capital's lifestyle has changed too. An MPLA decree has closed all nightclubs and discotheques, which are now seen as evidence of capitalist corruption. In the opposite camp, Unita have been settling into new headquarters here at Silva Porto, an elegant town once the exclusive preserve of the Portuguese. It's been Unita's military headquarters for some while, but it's now been made the centre for all activities. The original Unita capital of Huambo, known to the Portuguese as Nova Lisboa, is now too strongly threatened by the MPLA advance. The business and commercial centre has virtually closed down, and troops patrol everywhere. Many houses have been occupied by squatters, but Unita hopes to have them paying rent in the very near future. Meanwhile, though much of it has a run-down air, there's no real shortage of food or power, and the schools are being kept open on a fairly regular basis. Maintaining the educational system is given high priority, since it's one of the most effective ways of showing both young people and parents that Unita is really in control.
6x menos 2 x.
Silver Porto is in the district of Bie, an area of rich agricultural land. This is an important factor in Unita's military strategy, since it means that villages are self-sufficient in food, and so troops can be moved around the countryside without the fear of going hungry. It also makes possible a return to guerrilla warfare, should that ever be necessary. "40 miles southeast of Silver Porto, near the town of Chicala, is Camp Capolo, formerly a Portuguese penal colony, but now a UNITA training centre.
Viva Capolo, viva Capolo, viva Capolo Unita.
The camp is one of 12 in UNITA territory, and it can process from 1,000 to 1,500 men at a time. The course lasts 2 weeks and is mainly devoted to specialized weapons handling, though morale gets a lot of attention as well. Among UNITA's prize trophies are the handful of Cubans they've taken prisoner. According to American estimates, Cuba's given the MPLA up to $2 million in arms aid and sent up to 10,000 troops and advisors. UNITA, on the other hand, has received assistance from 1,200 South African troops, though these are now being withdrawn to South African border areas. Ambrizietti, a strategic coastal town in the north of the country, fell to the MPLA in mid-January after their concerted push, which forced the FNLA almost to the Zaire border. This helicopter, now barely recognizable, had been flown by South Africans, according to the MPLA, which also put on show other evidence of Western involvement in the conflict, ammunition bearing US insignia. It was after the capture of Ambrizietti that the MPLA first admitted they'd been reinforced by Cuban soldiers. 200 helped press home the attack, and the MPLA praised them as very good combat troops. Frightened FNLA soldiers were taken prisoner, some little older than this 12-year-old MPLA volunteer. He carried only an air gun, but most MPLA recruits are far better equipped. With so much outside assistance, how much is the struggle that of the Angolans themselves? Are Cuban soldiers actually in charge? We put the question to the Army's political commissar, Mbeto Traka.
All troops operating in this area in Angola are under Angolan control, are Angolan command. These Angolans are commanding all troops here. Let us say it's not everybody knows there are Cubans with us. They are our advisors for some, let us say, for this kind of war that you are forcing to do. But even this situation is not definitive. This is not definitive because we do not need the, let us say, to fight against enemies of our country, let us say, a kind of massive help So we need special moral and political help these years.
But are the Cubans fighting as infantry as well as advisors?
No, specialized as advisors. But we know that if we ask them to fight with us in the line front, they'll accept. But by the moment, we think that is not necessary. We can fight alone, as we have been fighting for 14 years against Portuguese and South African troops in Angola, as everybody knows.
Much fighting's taken place along the Benguela Railway. Running through Unita's HQ in Silva Porto to Zaire, it's vital to Unita's tactical mobility, while control of it would give the MPLA greater leverage over both Zaire and Zambia. Women flock to the Benguela trains to collect hot water, not because water's in short supply, but simply because it's easier than carrying it from long distances. But there's more to the railway than the convenient supply of hot water. For one thing, it's the quickest way to dispatch Unita troops to the Eastern Front. Since October, the MPLA have controlled Tessara de Souza at the eastern end of the railway. Consequently, Zambia and Zaire have been deprived of one of their most valuable trading links with the coast. The MPLA is continually attacking the line from the zones it holds north of Luso and from other strongholds on the Eastern Front. And they claim this is part of the reason why Zaire itself has sent a small force against them. This was as far as this train was to go. The MPLA had been there already and demolished a bridge. It's a common tactic, frequently followed up by an ambush, though not this time. On the road to Luso, rumors are rife. Unita soldiers talk of seeing MPLA armored cars and tanks supplied by Russia. But such reports aren't always accurate, for both sides are continually trying to impress their respective arms suppliers that the other side's being better treated by its allies. This bulldozer, crudely clad with iron sheet, had been described by scouts as a Russian armored car filled with 20 MPLA corpses. Luso itself has seen heavy fighting. Critically placed on the railway line, it was recaptured from the MPLA by Unita in December, after a fierce battle which left barely a window intact and cost the MPLA a claimed 200 men. Luso is one town which Unita's prepared to hold at all costs. It's a mustering centre for troops, ready for movement to the various fronts. Unita's claim to have inflicted heavy casualties in the area is difficult to accept. The mission hospital at Vuga would have handled the wounded, but doctors say they've admitted no soldier wounded in action since December. The patients they've treated have been mainly weary Unita men, most of them suffering from painful tropical ulcers caused by scratches and insect bites. 70 of the current inmates say they were cut off by the enemy and ran out of food during the march home. Jonas Savimbi, the Unita leader, brandishes an American rifle and proclaims its excellence.
That's good, that's excellent.
Excellent. Would you like more?
Oh, yes. I hope that I will get some more. Not for me, but to defend that people.
Unita, dug into the south of the town of Musende on the Central Front. No one could have blamed the soldiers if morale had been low, for the MPLA was increasing its hold when news came that South Africa was withdrawing aid for Unita. Nevertheless, Savimbi was warmly welcomed by his troops. An even greater reception later at Silver Porto, where 5,000 voiced their support. But for Savimbi, in reality, there was little to shout about. Behind the morale-boosting show, the grim truth. American aid to cease, because the memory of Vietnam is perhaps too fresh in the mind of Congress. South Africa announcing it will confine its forces to defending its own borders, and the MPLA, backed by Soviet might, consolidating for a southward drive. The crowd in Silver Porto was given no hint of the desperate situation when Savimbi went among them. The ebb and flow of fortune's been closely watched outside Angola. The superpowers, who have publicly identified themselves with opposing sides, now find the war threatens the credibility of East-West détente. South Africa's troubled too, facing a new communist neighbor. And for Zaire and Zambia, the loss of the Benguela Railway would pose grave economic problems. When he toured frontline villages after the rally, Savimbi's message was clear. Leave your homes and take to the bush. Altogether, over 200,000 Unita supporters were advised to evacuate and prepare to fight their future battles as a resistance force. Savimbi's tactics now are to withdraw his forces to positions which they can be sure of holding. Throughout Unita-held territory, bridges and roads have been mined or blown up to slow the advance of the MPLA. Savimbi told the villagers, "We were in the bush fighting the Portuguese for 7 years, and we can do it again." But a drawn-out guerrilla campaign, disrupting communications and business life, could strangle the economy of Angola and ruin the country all three factions are struggling so intensely to preserve. Savimbi has no words of comfort. He says he now has no hope of establishing the kind of Angola he dreamed of. But if it happens, defeat by the MPLA won't mean the end of hostilities, rather the beginning of a new kind of war.